What's up guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Sorry I've been MIA a fair bit lately, the past sort of week or so. I've got a video coming out probably tomorrow where I explain why that is at the moment. But anyway, I feel the need to make this video just because every time something comes out about this car, it just becomes a thing. And it annoys the crap out of me. I shaved a mo just to do this video. How do you like it? What do you reckon? So anyway, the old brekkie roll has proven to be probably the most controversial thing I've ever done in my entire life. And it's a freaking car. Now, a lot of people seem to have the wrong idea. I understand that making this video on my channel is probably preaching to the choir. Most of the people who watch my content know the entire story. And they're not the sort of people that are making these sorts of comments. But regardless, I'm sick of responding to the same comments. So I figured I'd just make this, get everything out on the table. I'm sorry that this is probably going to be a very long-winded sit-down video, but I only want to do this once. After I tell you the entire story, and the entire story is out there, I'm not going to be responding to any more stupid comments. If you see comments like that, you can direct them at this video and they can watch the whole story if they want. But honestly, I'm just sick of it. And it's not because of what people say about us. I know a lot of people out there don't like what people say about our business because they reckon it looks bad for us. But most of these people that are commenting these sorts of things are not very switched on. They don't have much of an idea. I would have likened them to the sorts of Karens that go to the tyre shop and get the tyres rotated, and then 2 weeks later they go back to the tyre shop jumping and screaming, stomping and up and down about the fact that since they had their tyres rotated, their aircon stopped working. So let me ask you, if you owned that tyre shop and that Karen then said she was going to go and tell all her Karen friends at their Karen club that none of them would go get their tyres done at your shop, would you at all be concerned? The way I see it is it's a bit of a win doing that. You know, regardless of that, we are not scrounging for work. We've got way more work than we can handle, so it really doesn't bother me. What does bother me though is that Zach can't seem to make any videos of this car without us getting dragged into it some way. Zach never even mentions us. You know, Zach doesn't talk about us when he makes these videos, and yet somehow people keep still dragging us into it. So this is going to be the entire story, tell all, start the beginning of the brekkie roll, how it came about, and our involvement in it. And this is going to be it after that. This is the end. So before we get into anything, I just would like to definitely point out at the very start, be very clear about it, that me and Zach, there's no bad blood. Me and Zach get along really well. I would like to think of Zach as a very good friend. There's no bad blood there. Zach's been very appreciative of our involvement in the car. Yeah, there's no problem between me and Zach at all. The second thing I would like to point out is the fact that Zach didn't pay us for any of the labor is a non-issue. That was the deal we made with Zach. We knew exactly what we were getting ourselves into. Essentially, I grew up with a lot of very unique opportunities at a very young age. You know, I started playing with motors when I was, you know, single digits. It was 9 or 10 when I started playing with motors. So those opportunities for me to be able to do that, it definitely shaped my entire life and how I have the knowledge I have. And, you know, it was the driving force to everything I've done to get myself to where I am now. The desire to have that knowledge is what pushed me into mechanical engineering. Same with Rex. You know, we don't ever take that for granted. So when someone like Zach approaches us and, you know, he's very proficient and proactive about having that same sort of driving passion, it's just that he obviously wasn't presented with the same opportunities we have. And he says he wants to learn, and he wants us to teach him some stuff. You know, people like us, we're more than happy to oblige. So that was the deal between us and Zach. It's not an issue. The only reason that I ever stress that Zach didn't pay is because it is a very important thing to note for how this rebuild was done. You know, it's not because it's an issue. We're not salty at all. It's not a problem. It's just that it is important to know that this was a very, very, very budget operation. And although Zach didn't pay us for any of the labor involved, he actually did pay for the second dyno session, and he did offer to pay for the third dyno session. It's just that I never actually invoiced him. So Zach was always really good about it. He was really appreciative of the fact that, you know, the deal was we do the labor for free. But when we're using our equipment like the dyno and stuff, he was always very, very happy to sort of offer to pay for that. So, you know, it's not a problem. It's just important to note. So at this point, if you've been watching the R33 uploads of the past couple of days that Zach's been doing, he's been doing some leak down tests, not leak down, he's been doing some boot leaks, at least leak. He's been doing some boost leak tests and stuff like that. He's found a few issues with it, which is fine. You know, obviously there's people all over the comments having a whinge about the fact that apparently these boost leak issues are our fault because we rebuilt the engine. If you actually watch the content or knew half the deal, you'd understand that Zach was very involved in this process. Zach did a lot of that work himself. A rebuilt engine isn't going to somehow just fix a heap of boost leaks on ancillary parts of the car. So I can't understand how that's really our fault. The second thing is the boost leak test has been done fairly incorrectly. This is not doing a boost leak test through the actual intake manifold while the cams are in is not the way you should be doing a boost leak test. As such, a lot of people are freaking out about an apparent blow-by issue, but you're talking about pumping static air into a cylinder that's not at top dead center. The car's dead cold. It's already got big ring gap. It's definitely going to bypass pressure into the crankcase. It's what's going to happen. I don't understand why everyone's freaking out about that. The fact that Zach taped up all of the breathers when he did that is not very good. He's pretty lucky he didn't push out a front or rear main seal in doing so. But regardless, I'm here to explain the whole process of how this motor went about and why I don't understand why everyone's freaking out. Anyway, regardless, I've told Zach a million times, do a freaking leak down test on that motor to see what the ring seal is actually doing, how healthy it actually is. After it was built, we did a leak down test on it after the run-in. We often do on fresh engines to see how the bed-in process went for the rings. That engine came back at less than 20% across the board, or maybe just over 20% across the board, which for how big the piston to bore wall clearance was and for how big we got the rings for that engine was actually very, very good. I was actually quite surprised it came back that good. So I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with that motor, but you know, there definitely may be an issue there somewhere, but the fact is everyone's freaking out about a motor that hasn't even been properly diagnosed yet, which to me is ludicrous. But anyway, I'm going to start from the beginning. We're going to talk about this entire build, how it came about, the whole go. All right, let's start from part one, which is essentially how this all came about. So obviously back then, Zach and I's channels were both very small, like between the two of us. I think at that point, Zach was only about 15,000 subs. I was only about sort of 3,000 or 4,000 subs. Obviously being an Australian YouTuber and living geographically quite close to Zach, I knew of him. I'd seen his videos and stuff. Anyway, I knew he bought this 33. He sort of reached out to me because he'd watched a few of my RB25 videos and RB content, and he sort of said to me, he's like, I've got this R33, it's got problems. You know, would you be interested in collabing and working together and, you know, helping me rebuild this motor and this and that? And like I said at the start of this video, you know, for someone like that, I'm more than happy to help out. Although at that time, we were just sort of starting to try and get the business off the ground. It wasn't the best time for us and I couldn't really afford the time. So I sort of said to Zach, I was like, I'm happy to do it, but it's going to be a spare time thing. You know, bring the car out to us. If you wanted to come out, that was the other thing, is Zach was pretty particular about the fact that he really wanted to be involved. He wanted to be there. So I was like, you know, I can't afford the time off regular work to do this straight away. I was like, bring the car out. It can be something we do on spare time, like one day a week we can work at it and that. And that was sort of the plan. It was all good. Zach went to Japan. He drove Samet's car. He actually did quite well. I was pretty impressed, honestly, by his driving. I was like, this kid's actually got some pretty natural talent, I believe. Anyway, he came back, whatever. We just kept on going with what we were doing. And then, you know, we sort of got hit with COVID. So we got hit with COVID just as we were starting to get the business off the ground. So we were super quiet. So we didn't have much to do. Zach was pretty much ready to go with this 33. So we saw it as a good opportunity to, at least if we've got nothing to do because we're quiet anyway, and we're not going to get paid, we can do this 33, smash it out. It's good publicity. Well, we thought it was going to be good publicity. So, you know, when you're faced with an issue like that in business, you've got two options. You can either sit there and not do anything and not get paid anyway, or you can try and be proficient in doing something that is going to further your business somehow, even though you're not going to get paid, which was going to be Zach's 33, which was hopefully going to sort of get us a bit more exposure in that. So at least we're doing something. So anyway, Zach had done a compression test at on the 33 at that point. You know, I'd seen it all. He showed me all of it, let me know it had low compression on one cylinder. Being pretty typical of RB25, knowing their issues, I said to him it's probably a ringland on that piston is cracked. I pretty much advised him, I was like, I wouldn't drive it, try and drive it as little as you can, because if the piston ringland's cracked, your bore may still be savable, but if you're driving it around and it dislodges some of that piston and it drags up and down the bore wall, it could mean a very expensive rebuild, not a very, very cheap one. Next minute, Zach's driving the car around, he's driving to and from shows, whatever. But that's the other thing I would like to very strongly iterate, is there's been a lot of things with this build that have been against my advice. All I can do is give advice the best I can. I can't make decisions for people. I can only give them information and tell them what I think. What Zach does with his car is essentially up to him. It's not my car. So that's another thing I'd like to stress pretty big. So anyway, literally the night before he brought it out to our workshop, he was driving up and down, doing car shows. I think he went to Downshift or something. He was doing street pulls. I was like, Anyway, he got there, we pulled it down. Nothing bad had happened, which was awesome. But yeah, just as I thought, cracked the ring line on piston number 3, I think it was. 3 or 4, pretty sure it was 3. Either way, pretty simple thing. We'll rebuild it, no worries. At this point, Zach had already got all of the rebuild stuff from a Taku garage. I'd actually said to him in the lead up while we were talking about it, I was like, you should probably wait to get, rings and bearings and stuff until we've actually pulled it down and taken measurements, because at this point we didn't know whether this engine had been rebuilt before. We didn't know if the crank had been ground. I didn't know if it had been what size pistons or what pistons it had in it, whether it had been bored. You don't know these things until you pull an engine down, particularly in that car that's had so many engines go through it. This engine was unknown case. We had no idea. But regardless, he got all this stuff from Otaku anyway. So that was most of the rebuild kit. It wasn't a whole rebuild kit. Again, Zach had said it's everything that we'd need. But obviously, Zach being admittedly himself not super knowledgeable about these motors particularly, it turned out that there was quite a lot of stuff missing. So this is where we got to, and it's going to lead me on to part 2 of the story, which was the actual rebuild process. So the rebuild process, and this is another very important thing to note, is that this engine build that we did is very, very different to anything we would do for a paying customer, which is why I said it's so important to note that Zach didn't pay. This engine was a pretty much zero budget. It was a $0 engine, essentially. I'm pretty sure, obviously, Zach paid for the rebuild kit from Otaku. I don't know how much or what it was discounted to. As most of you know, with problems with RB, I really wanted to put an extended crank snout on this motor. A few other things just for safety, things like the rear head drain and that. There was a few things I really wanted to do to this motor while it was apart. Zach's goal was pretty much whatever I thought was a good enough goal for a stock motor, stock pistons and rods. 400 wheel horsepower and a stock piston rod RB25 is, that's fine. That's a pretty good goal. So that was the plan. It was the cheapest rebuild as we could possibly do for around 400 horsepower. That's all right. All we really need for that is, like I said, a few things for safety, then like a multi-layer steel head gasket and a set of head studs, and we're on our way to 400 horsepower with a decent hot side and everything else. So of all the things that I wanted to do to this motor, only 2 of them really got done. The first was the rear head drain, which happened because Ross actually sponsored Zach the rear head drain, so he got that as a sponsorship, and the head studs, which Zach actually got from the previous owner of the 33 for free as well. So again, Bob, cheapest possible rebuild we could frickin' do. So being that the theme of the build was no budget, we tried to cut out as much machining as we possibly could. Now, when we pulled down the motor, it had the cracked piston ringland, but everything else in the motor was actually quite healthy. The bores were very glazed, they had a fair bit of watermark and stuff like that. They weren't the greatest, but all the bearings were quite healthy. The crank was really healthy. We just had to linish a few little spots out of it with some 1200. Overall, the motor was actually quite good condition apart from that ringland. So I was pretty happy to, just clean out the block as best we could. Not worry about getting an actual acid dipped or anything. It didn't seem like there was any metal or anything in it. It was going to be okay. A little bit of corrosion and stuff, but you get that with old iron blocks. But being that it was a multi-layer steel head gasket, it was still very important that we get the head skimmed so that we have a good mating surface for that head gasket at the very least. Now, we didn't get the block skimmed. I prepped the block myself. We didn't want to send the block to machine shop. It was another cost we didn't want to incur. So the other thing was, I found with the head, there was where the water jacket actually, they bore up towards the spark plug, where the water actually goes up to the spark plug to keep the spark plug area cool. I don't know whether it was casting fault or what had happened, but that had actually come across from where the water jacket is, very close to where the combustion area for the cylinder is, to the point where that head, where it was squishing down on the gasket, where that cylinder was, I think it was number 6, would only have been probably maybe a mil of engagement on the head gasket, which for your combustion area is not very good. So again, minimal cost. I'm not a very good fabricator. I was very honest with that at the time as well. But I had to go at welding up the head myself because we were going to get it sent to get skimmed anyway. So if I could get the weld in there, send it to the machine shop, get them to skim it, we would have been sweet. That would have been all good. But anyway, I'm not a good enough welder. It didn't work out for me. So the welding of the head didn't work. So we scrapped that idea. At that time, I hadn't spoken to the machine shop about what they could do about it. And I figured, this was a problem that I was very worried about. So I thought, we'll put some JB weld or something in there that's going to be better than nothing. Something is going to be better than nothing. Same thing. Build up the JB weld, let it go off, skim the head. Still going to help. So I did that. We sent the head to the machine shop. Fortunately enough, our buddies at the machine shop, they had us covered. They were going to weld it up. So they pulled that out, welded it up for us, skimmed the head. They also, there was one stud we couldn't get out that they had to helicoil for the exhaust side. And then the head came back to us, it was all sweet. Now, because they welded up that area of the head, I decided to recut those couple of valves on number 6 because obviously with welding you get a lot of heat soak and heat, and if the heat soak went into the steel valve seats, I thought it may have warped them, and for them valves to seal properly, we decided to grind them. The rest of the valves were all good. We just lapped them up. Actually, I didn't even lap them up. Zach lapped all his own valves. So, we tried to, we included Zach a lot in this build. Zach cleaned out all his own piston grooves. Zach cleaned up most of his own parts. We had Zach on the blade scraping all of the gasket surfaces. It was a very steep learning curve for Zach, which is exactly what it was always meant to be. That's why he approached us. That's what he wanted it to be. And we involved him the best we could. We had him lapping his own valves. A lot of this build, Zach was involved in a lot of it. And he, from what he told me, he enjoyed it a lot. It was all a very steep learning curve. And he really enjoyed learning a lot about the car. As far as the cracked piston ringlet went for that piston, I have obviously done a lot of RB stuff. I had a couple of pistons lying around, so we had a ring in. The ring in had different rod bolts in it. Now, we did the calculations on the density and the mass of the steel of the extra length on the rod bolts and found out what the extra weight of the big end would be. And it was going to be, obviously, ideally, you'd want to get something like that rebalanced. Obviously, ideally, you'd probably want to put a whole rotating assembly in there if you're going to change one piston. Ideally, it would have been great to get another set of rod bolts, but same thing, is just cost and availability, it wasn't there. So we just chucked this ring in. When I do rod bolts, we do them all up to stretch. So I made sure that the ring in rod bolts were still, the same sort of tensile and everything else as the rest, and everything was all good. Everything was sweet. Being that the block had done quite a bit of work, we just had Zach hand hone it, taught him how to hand hone the block with a drill hone, because we didn't want to send it to the machine shop. So Zach hand honed the block. The piston and ball wall clearance was quite loose, particularly on that ring in as well. And the ring in did have a slightly different piston deck height, but wasn't enough that we were worried about it. It wasn't enough that it would affect the tune so bad, and we didn't plan on tuning to a ragged edge anyway. Mind you, at this point, Zach had still talked about leaving the stock ECU in it for quite a while because he didn't have the money to pay for an aftermarket ECU. So we were building this engine to try and be able to sort of put a little bit of boost in it with a little bit of extra fuel on the stock ECU and try and get Zach to the point where he could have some fun. So, I gapped the rings quite generously because, Zach eventually wanted to make 400 horsepower. The cast RB25 pistons are renowned for being super, super brittle. So when you rattle these things or you get them too hot, you need that forgiveness. The other thing is obviously Zach wanting to learn a lot about it himself. He said he wanted to learn a lot about the EFI tuning side of things. Building a car for someone who wants to learn a lot of that, you got to make sure that there's some forgiveness in it. So we gapped the rings fairly big. I think they're about 16th thou, which for an RB25 bore is quite big, particularly with the piston and ball wall clearance we had, which was definitely on the loose side. So anyway, the motor went all back together with the Ross external head drain. Apart from that, it was pretty much everything was just stock, multi-layer steel head gasket, ARP head studs, stock cams went back in, new timing, new water pump, all that regular ass stuff. And essentially we had ourselves a pretty neat little, 400 horsepower capable RB25 stock bottom end motor, which we built for pretty much nothing. It was the cost of machining the head, which was very little. I've got a very good relationship with the machine shop that does our machine work, and whatever Zach paid for a lot of the parts that he got from Taco and whatever. So very, very, very cheap, bare bones, absolute bare bones rebuild of this RB25 just to try and get this thing so that it was healthy enough that Zach could, have some fun and do whatever with it. So anyway, that was pretty much the motor. The only other thing I did was get the flywheel machined. I got a mate that works at a clutch and brake shop who did that for pretty much nothing. So again, got Zach out of that for nothing. We bought a new clutch because it desperately needed a new clutch. I had a really good mate that worked at Repco as a parts interpreter. He managed to get us just the cheapest clutch that he could get for this thing for now. The other thing was that the gearbox was noisy. So what me and Zach talked about at the time, and the conclusion we came to, was that Zach was going to be replacing the gearbox next. That was the next thing on the list. He thought he'd just buy the cheapest, nastiest clutch he could for now, whack that in the car. That'll do for a little while. He can drive around with a noisy gearbox for a while, and then we can afford to get a gearbox rebuilt or replaced. He'll actually put a decent clutch in when he goes to do that. So that made sense. So I'm pretty sure that clutch was literally like less than $300 for the clutch. So that all went back together. Which I suppose, and went back in the car, and I suppose that brings us to the third chapter of this series, which was actually getting the car running again. So when we originally rebuilt it, it was just stock intake manifold, stock hot side. It was just a stock RB25 turbo. Everything was just stock. Everything was just put together stock. We put it in the car. Once again, Zach had a lot of involvement with that. Helped us out a lot, learnt a lot. He was there for everything. So we got it in the car, we got it running. I know we had heaps of issues. It was a while ago, there's that many issues that I can hardly remember. But we got the thing running, we got it onto the dyno, and we started our sort of run-in procedure. It was running really lean, stock ECU things, it was super lean. And it ended up, we actually had a water leak from I think it might have been one of the lines to the stock RB25 heat exchanger for the oil cooler for the filter. Either way, it was one of those lines at the back of the manifold underneath. It sprung a leak, pinhole leak, which was a real pain. Now, for anyone that knows anything about engines, when you do a fresh rebuild, you got fresh rings on a freshly honed bore. That first couple of hours, couple of 100 Ks, is imperative to getting your rings to bed in properly on your fresh hone. Now, a lot of top-end engine builders and a lot of OEM specs, they actually run their engines in on LPG because LPG is a dry fuel. So the worst thing you can do for a fresh motor is let it idle or wash down the bores because it's too rich. When we run in the fresh engine, we always run them as lean as possible. You want them bores as clean as you can, and you want it just sort of loaded up enough that you're pushing the rings out. For those of you who don't understand how rings work, they sit in your ring groove of your piston. They actually seal against the bore wall with compression or cylinder pressure. So cylinder pressure actually goes down the piston around into the ringlet and pushes the ring out. Or ring groove, I should say, and pushes the ring out. So having a little bit of load is also very important because you want enough load on that engine that ring is being pushed out into the bore, and you want it as dry as possible so you're not washing down the bore and try and let that, that ring actually bed in. So given that we had this water leak and it was the back of the manifold up underneath, the car was too up for us to touch. It wasn't leaking a dangerous amount of water at the time. So we decided we just keep topping it up with water as we go, just to try and complete the running in process for these rings, because it's very, very important. So you don't want to let them heat up and cool down too many times in that process. You really just want to get those rings bedded into that bore. So anyway, we continue the running. We finished the running process. We got it off the dyno. We got the water leak fixed and a few other issues I think we had, which I can't particularly remember, but there was a lot of issues with this car. So we got it off. We got that water leak fixed. At this point, I should stress that this is the first RB25 that I've ever done with all the stock ancillaries on it. I'd never done an RB25 with a stock intake manifold. I had a lot of people at the time comment on my videos, let me know that these cooling systems with these manifolds are really, really, really hard to bleed up, which is probably something I overlooked. A lot of the cars I do, it's pretty simple to just fill them with water and bleed them up. So I should add that in. So we fixed this water leak. I filled it up with water, did what I would normally do. It was like, sweet. Chucked it back on the dyno to try and find why this thing's running so lean, because if we let Zach take it, fresh motor, this lean on stock ECU, it was going to be same deal. So when this car came to us, it had had a history of going through motors because the car was an absolute bucket. It had been bush bashed. There was, underneath the car has been beaten up because it's been taken off road in the bush, bashed around paddocks. The thing was running lean. You know, this was apparently the third or fourth motor that had been through it. The car had such a reputation for being such a bucket and going through engines that it made it nearly impossible to sell. And this is why Zach actually got it so cheap. So that's why this car, you know, rebuilding the engine was literally the very start for this car. There was a lot of other stuff wrong with it. So we're back on the dyno. We're trying to figure out why this thing is running so lean. Unfortunately, if any of you know anything about the stock ECUs, they're very, very limited. They're locked. There's nothing you can really do with them. Through ECU talk on the computer, you can see a few things. We had issues with TPS, we had issues with IAC, a lot of those ancillary things on the car we had issues with. And yeah, we just could not get this thing to run with any more fuel. We tried another fuel pump. We tried putting, at the time we didn't have any really good regulator to chuck in it, but we did find one lying around. We chucked that in and tried to up the regulator, like just up the fuel pressure as much as we can. We did everything we could to try and get this thing running right, but obviously Zach didn't have money to spend to try and get it fixed properly. So it ended up, well, yeah, that was the first problem. The second problem we had was this thing seemed to keep using water, right? So we kept trying to fill it up with water. The water kept disappearing. Didn't make a lot of sense to us. And then the next thing that happened was it actually shot a fair bit of water on like once we actually finally got it to when we were running up a power run, it actually shot a heap of water out into our O2 sensor for the dyno and cooked it. So for those of you who know anything about tuning, once those O2 sensors get water on them, that's it. So at this point, I'm starting to freak out because water's going somewhere, I don't know where, and there's water freaking coming out the exhaust after we've done the run-in. So in my head, I'm like, the run-in should be plenty enough time to evaporate any condensation that should have been in that exhaust system. There shouldn't be any condensation in there. So in my head, I'm like, well, water's going somewhere and it's coming out the exhaust. And whether it's a bog stock rebuild or a very high-end 4-figure engine build that you've done, when you're the one that built the engine and stuff like that starts happening, you always automatically go to worst case. It just happens. So anyway, we're freaking out. We got this thing running as rich as we could. I've got it back on the hoist, and I'm starting to worry about possibly a head gasket issue. Was there something under the head gasket? Was it not clean enough? What's going on? Fault find, racking my brain, freaking out about it. What I hadn't realized at that time, which I didn't notice until some people had pointed out in the comments of my videos, and then I went back to watch Zach's content, is that Zach had actually gurneyed out his engine bay with the gurney, and when we pulled the motor out, we just took the dump off but left the exhaust there. So when he gurneyed out the engine bay, it actually got a shitload of water in the exhaust, and the exhaust still had a catalytic converter in it. So after a lot of trying to fault find and figure out what was going on, that's when we did our leak down test at that point, and the thing came back all sweet. Everything was okay. No other diagnosing pointed to any head gasket issues. And what we pretty much came to the conclusion was that we didn't spend enough time bleeding up the system. And when Zach had cleaned out the engine bay, he got a heap of water in the exhaust. Water must have been sitting in the cat, which obviously can do. And when it finally came done to actually load this thing up and get some exhaust flow happening, it shot water out onto the O2 sensor. So it was a coincidental few things that didn't look very good, obviously. And we were freaking out. The internet was freaking out. I had said in the video, this is the other thing, is Zach, because he doesn't know cars super well, which he admits, he's learning. Everyone's sort of happy to help him learn, except for the internet, apparently. So I'd said to Zach at the time, I was like, if it's a head gasket issue, we had just a packet of that, a bottle of that copper leak fix. I was like, well, if it's a head gasket issue, the motor's got to come back out anyway. I was like, an easy way for us to tell, considering no other diagnosing had come back with any head gasket issues, was to use a bottle of this stuff. If this bottle goes through it and it stops using water, supposedly, well, then we know it's probably a head gasket issue, but then we can pull it out and pull the head off. But until we could sort of diagnose that it definitely was a head gasket issue, I wasn't too keen to pull it out and undo all the work we just did. And obviously, Zach didn't have any money to pay for new parts, let alone the labor to do so. I didn't have money to pay for the parts to do so. So it was something I was trying to avoid. Now, that was the idea between putting some stop leak in it, was just to try and get a proper diagnosis, because if it worked, then the motor would have to come out anyway. All of a sudden, the internet's freaking out about putting chemi-weld in a fresh rebuild and this and that. It's just like some of the comments like these are just I suppose I can't blame people for thinking that, but it's just because people not knowing the whole story and Zach not being very good at explaining the whole story. The other problem I had was that at the time, due to us setting up the business and stuff, I'd filmed a lot of content, so my content was about 2 weeks in advance. So Zach's content was coming out like very, very prior to my content. So people were getting Zach's side of the story, and then I wasn't releasing the content up to date. So they weren't getting my side of the story or our side of what was happening. They weren't getting the proper explanations of what was going on. And then by the time our stuff came out, no one was really interested. So that's pretty much what happened there. Anyway, regardless, we figured that it wasn't a head gasket issue. So the car was all sweet. Still had the running all and that. I said to Zach, he needs to do something with this ECU, because we were pretty much at the point where we were at the limit of how much time we could spend fault finding this thing. You know, we were happy to help Zach rebuild the motor and get the motor healthy, but as far as all these other issues the car had, you know, we couldn't spend days and days chasing these issues unpaid. We had other work to do. By that point, we actually, after the early COVID situation, we had work coming back in the door. We were getting busy. I was like to Zach, you need to sort something out with this car, baby it. If I had it my way, it would have left on a trailer. You know, most of us car people trailer our cars, particularly our, you know, drift cars, and a car that's so uncertain and fresh build, I definitely wouldn't have driven that from our workshop to where Zach lives, which is quite a way away. But Zach not having a tow car or anything like that, or any means to tow it, it's his only way around, which is another very important point for a lot of the things that happen throughout this car's involvement with us. He had to drive it. So I said to Zach, baby this thing home, don't rev it, don't get into it, don't boost it up. Try and sort something out as far as an ECU, something we can actually get data for, so that we can, at the very least, if we're going to fix a lot of these problems for them, we actually have data to go off to know what they are. So anyway, I sent Zach away, and that was it for quite a while. So that's pretty much the end of chapter 3, which brings us into chapter 4 for this car. Which was the aftermarket ECU. So Zach put Zach onto Whitey's wiring, because Sam is another one of those people that's really, really good guy, does really, really awesome work, and he deals for Link and Haltech and stuff. So we put Zach onto Sam, and Sam helped Zach out a lot as well. And Zach ended up going for the Link ECU, the plug and play. When he put that ECU in the car, the only extra sensor he opted for was intake air temp, because I'm pretty sure the Link actually needs that to run the car. So he had this new ECU, but it was still same stock injectors. It was the same fuel pump that we actually put in the car for him. Nothing else had changed. It was just the ECU, so that we could have a look and get some data. And that was pretty much what the plan was. So they put the ECU in, he put the RB25 base map on it, and once again he drove it out to the workshop, which if I had it my way wouldn't have happened, especially not with a base tune that you haven't had run up on a dyno. You don't know how it's behaving or what's going on. Now usually the Link base tunes are very good, but that is only assuming that everything else in the car is working fine, which as we knew for this car it wasn't. So Zach drove the car out to us again. Once again, it was just a single day. At this point we're freaking flat out, super busy. We'd organised to block off one day for Zach to try and sort this car out for him, see what we could do. And once again, Zach had driven it out to us, and once again, it was Zach's ride to get home. He had no other way to get home. So we were very limited as to what we could actually do with this freaking car. And same thing, it got there and it was running even leaner than it was when it left with the stock ECU. So the fact that it sort of had made it there and not damaged anything was lucky, but it seemed to be healthy enough. We went through the day chasing pretty much all of the same issues. We managed to get enough fuel in it with the ECU and a few other extra things that it was safer to drive. I think we could only get it down to about a 12.8 AFR. If you know anything about the thermodynamic properties that petroleum-based fuel has in the combustion process, a 12.8 AFR on a stock cammed, stock compression RB25 DET at the stock 8 or 9 pound or whatever it was, You know, it was pretty cold at that point, winter, ambient temps are down. It's not unsafe to drive. So I got it to the point where it was safe for Zach to drive. But same thing, I told him, I was like, you can drive it around. It's still got a fuel supply issue. We've still got a fuel issue here. Drive it around, just don't go flogging it on a track or whatever, but we need to sort out this fuel issue. This thing needs, you know, injectors or whatever. Like, it needs better upgrades. You've got 25-year-old injectors that came stock in this car when it came from Japan. You know, they're average at the best of times, especially at this age when they've never been serviced. Not only are you not getting the right fuel, you're probably getting a terrible spray pattern. It's not ideal. But same sort of thing where Zach needed to get home. It was his ride home. So same thing. It's off you go, drive it home. I just told him not to go flogging it, really. I said, you know, drive it. I'll pull here and there at 12.8 AFR at those sort of ambient temps, you know, and intake air temps, I should add. We did have intake air temp on the link, so that's safe enough. It's amazing how many people I had having a dig about how they reckon I didn't know how to tune because I told Zach to drive it at a 12.8 AFR. But yeah, if you know anything about you know, turbo systems and the dynamics of the combustion process with boost and everything else, there's not very much boost, particularly on something with stock cams. And yeah, with really low ambient temps, it was really low intake temps. There was not a lot of risk in that. The risk would have been if he went flogging it, you know, pull after pull, or took it to a track where it actually would get high intake temps and that sort of thing. But anyway, regardless, I had all these people jumping down my throat about how they reckon I couldn't tune, which that's whatever. Honestly, I don't base how I know. I didn't learn how to tune from YouTube. I don't base what I know from just nothing. You know, I studied mechanical engineering for a long time. What I know about tuning is based on physics and fluid dynamics and fluid mechanics and stuff. So it's not shit that I just pull out of thin air, you know. Either way, I'm the tuner. I'm the one that takes that risk by doing that. So whatever. Again, like I said, I don't really let this stuff get to me. It doesn't really bother me. I'm just making this video because I'm sick of replying to the same comments, and I'm sick of Zach not being able to make a video of this car without us getting dragged into it. So anyway, Zach, the car leaves with the link. For the second time, leaves our workshop with the link. For the second time, I'm not happy with how it leaves the shop, but once again, Zach's got to get home. I'm not going to give him a ride home. It's a long way for us to drive, so it is what it is, really. But same thing, Zach's aware of it. Zach's aware it's still got fuel issues. Zach's aware not to go flogging the car. Zach can still at least start driving the car around and enjoy it a little bit. And Zach knows that he needs to do more to sort out this fueling issues. Not only that, but just people, it's no secret that I really don't like the stock intake manifolds on the RB25s. It's not that they don't work well, it's just the fact that they are so ridiculously convoluted and complicated when they don't need to be. So I'd always been pushing Zach to upgrade the intake manifold anyway, because I don't like them. So Zach pretty much decided he was going to get a decent set of injectors, which is awesome. That's definitely two things you really need even on a budget build to, you know, keep things alive and do well, is a decent control system, so decent ECU and good, decent, reliable fueling. And I always maintain that with people. You can buy China turbos, you can buy whatever you want, cheap out whatever you want, but you can't cheap out on your fuel system and you can't cheap out on your ECU, because those are the two things which are going to keep the thing alive at the end of the day. So I was super happy that he actually bought a really good set of dynamically flow matched Bosch 1000 CSCS injectors from Golby's, reputable dealer, genuine injectors, dynamically flow matched. That is a tuner's dream that someone would do that. He got a good quality Turbo Smart FPR, and he actually decided he was going to put his Walbro 460 that came out of his Falcon into the Skyline, so that it had a, you know, plenty enough fuel, and we were going to finally, once and for all, knock this fueling issue on the head. We also decided that we were going to send the car to Sam at Whitey's and get the fuel pump wiring upgraded. It's a pretty common thing for R33s. Now, I've had a lot of people comment saying, you know, oh, how hard would it be for you to do that? Why couldn't you do that? Like, you know, you don't know how to do that, this and that. I've been very honest in all of my content when I do wiring. We know enough about wiring to get by. I'm happy to do stuff on drift cars, etc. I am not a qualified auto sparky, and doing auto electrical work on a road-going registered car presents a lot of legal and insurance issues for us. So that is not our forte. It's not what we do. We send that sort of stuff to the professionals that do that, which is Sam. You know, our thing, we build motors, we tune cars. Sam does wiring. So we send it to Sam. Sam upgraded the wiring as well before the car came to us. And also Zach decided he was going to buy this Freddy forward-facing plenum off my advice. You know, a lot of people were pissed off that he bought such a cheap intake to us, but I'd used these Freddys on 25s before. I found them to be quite like a fine intake. You know, you can go to like your Otaku intake or your ProFlow, which are actually the exact same. They're still just China intakes. You know, your Freddy is just a different China intake. Personally, the results I've seen from these things on the dyno and in real world for this sort of caliber of build, the Freddy was a really good you know, intake to go with. It performs well enough. It tidies up the engine bay so much more. It's so much easier to work on. And so that's what Zach did. He got the rail, the injectors, the cold side, like, you know, the intake, all of this fuel system. And, you know, between the ECU and all this fuel system, Zach was finally spending some money on this car. Obviously, by this point, Zach's YouTube's starting to sort of take off. So he's got a little bit of money to spend on this car, which is awesome. So finally getting this car sorted. At this point, he decided he was going to upgrade the turbo as well. He ended up reaching out to max speeding rods just to get a cheap China one. I told him, like, I'd had fine results on the China turbos before. They're not the most efficient turbos, obviously. You get what you pay for, but they work. And at that point, it was probably going to be better off than the stock RB25 one that he had in the car. So they ended up reaching out to max speeding rods. They gave him a turbo for free, so that was another sort of free upgrade. That's the only reason it went on the car. So we ended up, he bought it out to us. We ended up installing all this new stuff on the car, which again, we had nothing but issues. The Freddy forward-facing plenum comes with hardware to fit it to the car. Zach bought it out to us, there was no hardware. So we had to completely custom sort of make and scrounge around and find bolts that were going to work and pull water necks out of old manifolds and re-goop them into new one. We had so much trouble with this manifold install because we had no hardware. And wouldn't you know, recently, Zach found that it actually did come with hardware. And he found that in his house, which he is very, very apologetic about, because we spent like 2 days, best part of 2 days on this manifold getting it sorted. So anyway, regardless, we finally got this thing, the cold side sorted. We got the turbo on it. So when Zach brought the car out to us, we had accounted for 2 days. I was like, bring your swag, you know, stay out here for the night. We'll spend the day sorting out this intake and turbo and stuff, and then we'll get it on the dyno and we'll have a day to sort out the dyno. Even that, when we do a tune, we like to have a car for at least 3 days. That way you get your tune in on your first day, which gets your maps right. And then once your maps are correct, you can then dial in your cold start. So if we got it for 3 days, we get 2 good morning sessions to make sure the cold start's good. Because obviously we aim for you to be able to go out to your car at any hour of the morning, at any temperature, and just hit the key and have it start up and idle and warm up. So even then, doing the intake on a day and then trying to tune the car for a day was already a lofty goal. And then the intake ended up pushing over through into the second day, and then even the third day we were still having issues. Zach had things to go home and do. He had already booked the car in for a Friday night drift. The other thing is when he originally built this car, it never had a catch can. The breathers were literally just off the covers and then down into the corner of the engine bay. They're actually poking through the old, side mount intercooler hole. Literally where they could just suck up dirt, and it was just definitely not on. I tried to get Zach to get a decent catch can set up the whole time, and this time when we did the intake, it came back, it was still like that. So I had just that old crappy D1 spec catch can lying around. It was a CL catch can, so that's no good. So we drilled a heap of holes in the top of it so that it would breathe somewhat, and we temporarily installed that to the car. There's a lot of things that we temporarily did to get the car happening, which Zach had said he was going to replace. Anyway, I told Zach about this, so that was all known. So that's where that T1 spec catch can came from. It's literally still on the car today. It was meant to be a very, very temporary solution, as in like a few days. And it's very important because of the piston to bulwark clearance on that engine and the fact that we gapped the rings pretty wide. it breathes a lot. And RBs are a very hairy breathing engine to start with. Now, RBs are renowned for having oil drainback issues. The problem being is that the RBs from the factory have literally only 4 internal drains at the back of their head down through the block and 1 external at the front. There's very limited avenue for oil to return back to the sump. Now, when you've got an engine that's breathing really bad, the RB25 also has its PCV located right at the top of the engine, on that driver's side can cover. That's the PCV for the engine, which is right at the top. So all of your crankcase pressure has to travel up those oil drain passages to get to the PCV and get extracted from the motor. So as you can imagine, the fact that it's got oil drainback issues, if you've got breathing issues, it's a compounding issue where you've got compounding issue of oil drainback and breathing fighting each other to get out of the motor. Not only that, is that even just having crankcase pressure is a compounding issue in itself, because the more crankcase pressure you have, the more pressure on the backside of the rings. The more pressure on the backside of the rings, the worse your ring seal is. If you can get that pressure out from the backside of the rings, you're going to get a better ring seal, and as such, you're going to get less blow-by. So as you can imagine, if you've got an engine that wants to breathe, you got to let that engine breathe and it's going to perform a lot better. You keep choking it up, you keep that crankcase pressure in there, that's when you're going to start pushing oil out. You're going to have more blow-by issues, etc. It's a compounding problem. So I stressed to Zach pretty importantly that he needed to get a decent catch can set up for this freaking car, and it still hasn't got one on it. But like I said earlier in this video, that's the avenue where as what I know and what I can do is give these people advice, tell them what I would do, tell them what I think they should do to the best of their ability. But at the end of the day, it's not my car, it's not my decision to make. I'm not going to spend the money to do it. Once I give people this information, it's up to them what they actually do with the car. So that's the whole theme of really this whole video, is that people keep pointing the finger at us when a lot of this stuff, it's against our advice. So anyway, long story short, from that intake and everything, by the time we got it on the dyno, I literally had 2 hours. So that car, even as it currently sits, that was the last dyno session we had. It was a 2-hour tune. All I had time to really do was get the fuel map sorted with the new injectors, get it scaled properly, and have fueling actually working. Managed to get the VCT dialed in, because we didn't get to do that the last time we had it on there with the link, so the VCT wasn't working. Sorry. There's another important thing I'm missing. That's why it took so long. So Zach, this motor has a really bad leak from the VCT cam gear. We chased our tails for this leak for literally, this is another reason it went out in 3 days. If you watch the footage, we busted ass to get this car sorted in the 3 days. Zach included. Like I said, Zach was there, he was part of it, he busted ass too. Again, very steep learning curve for Zach, I think. But yeah, we had this leak. We thought it might have been a cam seal. We chased our tail for ages. We ended up, we retimed this motor like 4 or 5 times. We ended up putting all the timing gear back on with no covers to try and find the source of this leak. Anyway, it turns out it's where the actual VCT cam gear actually is. It's just like a seamless join to the mechanism, and it was leaking out of there. Obviously, your VCT cam gear is pressurized. This is not ideal. We tried our best to try and source another VCT cam gear that wasn't leaking. We couldn't, so it had to go back on. That was another thing. So that was happening on the dyno as well. We had a pretty bad oil leak from that VCT cam gear, which again, putting that cam gear back on was literally a temporary solution. Zach had said at that point, we put the old light back on. He said, he's going to get Tom to get another VCT cam gear from Kudos. He's going to come up. They're going to sort it out literally that Saturday, which was 2 days after the Thursday we were trying to dyno it. So it was like, it'll be fixed in 2 days. I was like, sweet, well, I'll put it back on. You can sort that out. No worries. So anyway, had it on the dyno for 2 hours, sorted out the fuel scaling, got the fueling right for the injectors, got the Mac valve happening, got boost control happening, got it to a point where it would just run out of boost. So the exhaust, the hot side on that car is quite small, still a stock cast manifold. The turbo that was put on it is fairly small housing, and it's still got the stock R33 dump pipe, which, as a lot of people know and I've explained, very, very, very restrictive. So we ended up just running out of flow on the hot side. So we ended up getting to a point where we could sort of spike it to around 18, 19 PSI. But once you sort of get up to that 5.5, 6,000 RPM, it would just keep dropping back down to 16. That's all it wanted to flow. Running a engine with exhaust gas pressure that high or back pressure that high, particularly one that wants to breathe quite a lot, is not a very good thing. You're getting a lot of contamination, not only in the cylinder but also into the crankcase and stuff like that. It's not good. So we dialed it back to 16 psi because that's all the hot side wanted to flow. That's where it was. Happy days. You know, got VCT working. That's pretty much where we got to. As far as the timing got, I didn't even really get time to touch the timing. I'm pretty sure I just took a stock RB25 base map, and I think I just pulled 2 degrees out of everything, simply for the fact that it was operating under a fair bit of back pressure, and I just wanted it to be safe for now. So the plan was always to get the car back and put it on the dyno and finish the timing map. Never got a chance to do that. It needs a lot of cleaning up, that thing. So that's how it was. But regardless, at least the car was making, you know, 16 psi. We made 280, I think, wheel, something around there. You know, not as much as it should have been making with decent timing, but at the same time, more power than it ever made before. And it was finally fueling properly. You know, we actually finally had good fueling. So that's pretty much how it was left. Zach left this workshop literally like it was dark. It was like 7:30 at night by the time we'd actually got it sorted and got it off the dyno. And it was just a mammoth effort, and it was so freaking hard to get it to that point. So then off it went. So anyway, at the very least, I was happy the car was finally safe to get beat on. I was happy for Zach to take it to Friday night drifts and start actually beating on the car and really, you know, giving it a serve. But I still wasn't 100% happy with the car the way it left, because I literally just didn't have enough time on the dyno to get it done. So that's pretty much how it got to where it is. As I said, it really needs a good catch can setup, something that vents properly. Also, ideally, something that actually draws air out. The way I normally would do a catch can for an RB like that is I would actually put a breather on the sump, so that you can actually breathe or vent the crankcase pressure from the sump externally into the catch can, so that you're not actually pressurizing your oil drains to get air or pressure back to the top of the motor to get out. So normally it'd be two breathers from the covers, 1 breather from the sump, and then what I'd normally do is from the catch can, I'd have a baffled breather that actually runs back into the intake to draw air through. So that's a fully sealed catch can setup. That's legal. It's a very good working system, and that, like I said, it helps with your ring seal and everything's sweet. But Zach's still got this D1 spec ganger, hole drilled catch can on it, and he takes it to Friday night drift, and then yeah, exactly what I expected would happen is it pressurizes. At some point when I was doing the intake manifold as well, I actually broke the dipstick. I was trying to bend the dipstick tube away from the manifold to try and get it to fit. I accidentally broke the plastic top of the dipstick off. So the rubber seal that would normally go into the dipstick tube, the plastic behind it split, so it doesn't actually seal very well into the dipstick tube. The motor's not breathing, so I kept pushing the dipstick out. Pretty standard, what I would expect. A few weeks go by after that Friday night drift. Obviously, Zach still hasn't done the breather or whatever, the catch can. He gives me a call and he's freaking out about a compression test. I was like, oh, what's up? He's like, oh, I did a compression test. It come back at 110 even across all 6. I was like, all right, it's dead even. So I was like, what compression test are you using? He's like, oh, this Tool Pro one. It's a screw-in one. I was like, yeah, it's exactly the same compression tester I have. Pretty standard with the screw-in ones. My one, I know it reads fairly low with the screw-in fittings. I said to Zach, I was like, look, if you're worried, get another compression tester, preferably one you just push down with a tapered seal. They usually tend to seal a bit better on the actual plug hole. I was like, do another compression test. And he did, and this time it came back at like 125 even again. And I was like, I've done 2 compression tests with 2 different testers that are dead even. So, like when you do a compression test, that's all you're really looking at is how even they are. You can't really get too hung up on the numbers because there's too many factors. Like there's too much there. So you've got an engine that's got a pretty big piston and bore wall clearance and wide ring gap. When it's cold, you are going to get probably quite a bit of air bypassing the rings. You really need to allow it to heat up for that piston to expand and close up the piston and bore wall gap a little bit. And at operating temperature, it's going to be a bit better. So anyway, ever since he even sent those compression tests, I've been telling Zach, do a leak down test. That's going to tell the story. Do like an operating temperature leak down test of that engine. It'll tell you the story of what's healthy or not. Like I said, I'm not going to go ahead and say that there's nothing wrong with that motor. There potentially could be, but it hasn't been diagnosed properly yet. And Zach's already talking about building another motor. As I explained in the start of this video, me and Zach, there's no bad blood. Like I said, that car is Zach's car. Zach can do whatever he wants with that car. He can take it to whoever he wants. If he wants to build another motor, he can do that. I literally have no problem with that. It's not going to come between me and Zach as friends. Doesn't bother me one little bit. Nothing that Zach does with this car really bothers me, except for when he doesn't listen. And even then, that doesn't bother me because Zach, it just bothers me because people comment blaming us. So that's what this is all about. So anyway, as you can imagine, you do a leak down test, operating temp, top dead center, both valves closed. That's how you normally do a leak down test, check the ring seal, valve seal, everything else. The fact that we're going off this engine's being unhealthy simply for the fact that a boost leak test was done not properly, and you've got air going into a cylinder of a cold engine that's not at top dead, and it's 16 psi bypassing the rings, and it's going into the crankcase and it's breathing. To me, that's not a diagnosis. That's not a correct diagnosis. So this engine needs to be diagnosed properly. I'm confident that it's going to be fine, but whatever. Obviously, Zach's got other advice. Nothing to do with me. He knows what I think. That's all I can do is tell him what I think, and it's up to him what he does from there. So, like I said, it's not an issue. I suppose the only thing I can think of that I forgot to add in the whole story, I know when Zach got the car home after the initial rebuild, whenever we do a build with multi-layer steel head gaskets, we always run them in on just water for a few reasons. Firstly, if it leaks, you don't end up with coolant everywhere, which obviously putting a fresh motor back into a fresh car that's just been built, you're redoing everything. Chances are, usually, you at least come across one leak. The second reason is a multi-layer steel head gasket. They need a few heat cycles. If you've ever seen one, there's not really anything to actually seal around the water jackets in the head gasket. It's a really good idea to run just water so they can build a little bit of a corrosive sort of seal over a few heat cycles. It's an old school thing. It's what we always do with multi-layer steel head gaskets. So when we sent the car back from the initial rebuild, it still had the run-in oil in it, and it still had water in it from the run-in. And we told Zach, when you go home, change the oil, drain the water, put coolant in it, you'll be right to go. When he drained the coolant, when he drained the water, it looked disgusting because the block hadn't been prepped. So we cleaned the block out as best we could just with a gurney, but we didn't pop any Welsh plugs out or do anything like that. It was time and money that wasn't wanting to be spent on the engine. And such, so that initial water going through it and flush, it got a heap of corrosion out of the block, and that's why it looked gross. So I had heap comments about that as well. Once again, if you sort of think about these things, you figure out why they are, how they are. But anyway, the point of the video is that this is a very different build to a regular, a customer comes to us, wants their engine rebuilt or wants a forge build or something like that. This is a very special case. It's a very much of an anomaly because Zach wanted to learn about it, Zach wanted to be involved himself, and Zach didn't want to spend any money. As such, this engine was built bare budget, bare bones, only what we had to spend on it to get it to be working and do its job. And the consequence of wanting to run a engine with stock cast pistons and have it be reliable for 400 wheel horsepower in a block that hasn't been, we don't know how many Ks it's done. The piston to ball clearance is pretty wide. Got to give it a little bit of ring gap to be safe, and it's got a little bit of blow by. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's unhealthy. As I say to people all the time, blow by is not going to kill your engine. What is going to kill your engine is if your ring gap's too tight and you butt a ring, because it's going to pull the top off a piston. That's what happens. So blow by is not an enemy. It's an issue that you can deal with. I certainly wouldn't say that it's ideal. When we're building a fresh motor and we're using all new components, it's definitely not something we like to see. But when you're looking at a bare bones basic rebuild of a stock bottom end and you want it to be safe, well then it's going to happen. It's just a byproduct of what happens. Now, to deal with it, you set up your breathing system to correctly deal with blow by. It is what it is. If the ring seal was unhealthy, the thing would be burning oil, which Zach reckons it's not. I haven't seen it really since it left the shop, so I can't comment, but apparently it's not blowing smoke, it's not burning oil, which means the ring seal is actually doing pretty well. It's just the fact that this thing, when it's cold, gets bypassing air. which is just a byproduct of the way it was built, because it was built for no money. So anyway, there have been comments made about us ripping Zach off or hosing Zach with this rebuild. We literally have put well over 90 hours of labor into this car for nothing, for free. We've helped Zach immensely with this thing for nothing but just the want to help him along and help him get to where he wants to be, and for obviously the exposure from his audience for us, which backfired completely because it turns out, well, yeah, it is what it is. But regardless, like I said, it's a non-issue, the fact that it didn't pay. I don't regret anything with the whole build. It is what it is. It went how it went, but I'm pretty confident that motor's going to be sweet. If you put a better hot slide on it that breathed better, if you put a decent catch can on it and fix the breathing issues with the engine, and if you pumped a little bit more boost in it, this engine would still be safe and still make good power. I'm pretty confident, unless something's gone wrong since we actually leaked and tested it the first time and now. So unless something's happened between then, the way the motor was built is fine. Anyway, that's the whole story. That's the Zach Baldy R33 and our entire involvement in it. That's everything laid out on the table, and that's going to be it. I'm not going to be replying to any more comments because they're always the freaking same. Now everyone knows the whole story. Don't know what else to tell you. Anyway, guys, like I said, there's no bad blood. I get along fine with Zach. Me and Rex and Zach have had heaps of fun actually building this car. We all get along great. But if, it's Zach's car, he can do with it what he wants. He can take it to whoever he wants to take it to. It really doesn't bother me one little bit. Me and him are still going to be friends at the end of it all. I just made this video so that everyone else knows the whole story. Like I said, for my channel, it's probably preaching to the choir. But if you see anyone commenting dumb stuff, you can point them at this video. They can get the whole story. But this is going to be it. This is the end of it. That was our involvement. That was everything that went down. Now you all know, and that's going to be it. Anyway, guys, maybe you'll see the ZBR33 on my channel in the future. Maybe you won't. I don't know. It doesn't bother me. At this stage, I'm way too busy to try and clean it up for Zach for nothing. I would like to clean up that tune a bit, but you'll see in the video that I'm releasing tomorrow about why I've been MIA. We are just so flat out busy at the moment. So anyway, guys, hope you've enjoyed. That's the whole story. Love to Zach. Yeah, peace out. Have a good day.